Benjamin Disraeli said, "The greatest good you can do for another is not just to share your riches, but reveal to him his own." Introduction. Aching for expression. Do you get a sense that there is something within you aching to be expressed? Do you feel a yearning to find a calling in life that completes you? After all, at the end of the day, at the end of your life, what is it really? Is it only the passage of time and the maintenance of your body? Is it only the earning of enough money to pay your bills and take a few vacations? Mother Teresa said she saw a loneliness in American eyes that was the greatest poverty. We have so much comfort, so many toys, yet we want something more. Sometimes we think that something more is power, money, pleasure, or fame. Shortly after I graduated from college as an electrical engineer, I met a man during a ski trip to Switzerland who offered to partner with me in an artificial intelligence software business. Within 3 years, the company was quite profitable, and I had all the things that should have made me happy: a boat, a fancy car, a customized van, all the latest toys. I'm an airplane pilot and was even about to buy a plane. One day, I stood in my office building, looking out the window. Across the way stood a large building with a man's name on it. That's where I was headed. I knew that it was only a matter of time before I stood in a building with my own name on it. As I stood there imagining my building, a voice inside me interrupted my thoughts. That's not what I want. As I pondered, I asked myself, is this all there is to life? Ambition, money, and the pleasure of spending it? I had relationships that were fulfilling, yet that didn't feel like enough reason for being born, the fulfillment of the reason for my existence. I responded to my inner voice, what do I want? The voice came back, I want to know my soul, my purpose for being here. I realized that I was really yearning to discover more about my purpose in life, and so I put together a simple but courageous plan to turn inward and focus on my spiritual existence. I gave my business to the employees and became a monk. You might say that I took a risk. I might agree. Eventually, I think we all make this choice. The choice toward becoming who we are meant to be is a risky choice. It is a choice that comes from somewhere inside our heart. It is powerful and sometimes unorthodox, and sometimes as quiet and simple as a change in perspective. When Mother Teresa decided to go to India to help the poorest of the poor, she had little support from outside herself. Nevertheless, she made her choice. She boarded a train and rode it to India. When she stepped off the train, she walked to a dying man lying on the street and held him in her arms as he died. In the monastery, we studied the great esoteric teachings passed down through ancient civilizations, and came to think of people as spiritual beings, riding on this planet in the vehicle of a body for a short time. Instead of being an extremist and abandoning the physical world for the spiritual, I was taught to embrace both. My secret tool was quantum physics, a compelling set of scientific principles that seemed to have a lot in common with spiritual principles. As a monk, I practiced moderation in everything, and when I left the monastery, I practiced moderation in everything, including moderation. I had studied the lives of saints who lived extremist lifestyles, renouncing the physical, but I also studied the lives of heroes, people who had mastered the practice of balancing the spiritual and physical. The heroes appeared to be supremely happy and confident inside their body vehicle, people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Mother Teresa. These people lived fulfilling lives and made a contribution to humanity. The lives of heroes revealed a kind of science to great happiness. Since the motivating factor kept showing up as a spiritual virtue living in our chest, I called it heart virtue. I discovered the 3 important steps all great people throughout history had taken. The people we most admire and build statues and memorials for because of how well they lived their lives all committed themselves to these 3 things: knowing themselves, communicating beautifully what they stood for, and making a contribution. The first step is what this book is about. Heart virtues. Since heart virtues are at the core of our being, the things we value, believe, and act on, to know your heart virtue is to know yourself. When I first started using heart virtues with my clients, I could not have anticipated the profound and powerful impact heart virtues would have on people's lives. At first, I thought a heart virtue was sort of a compass for life. What I discovered, instead, is that a person's heart virtue is the core of their life. In a sense, your heart virtue is living you. Originally, I developed the heart virtue assessment as a quick way to give people confidence so they could listen better. It is very hard to listen without self-confidence. But people were reporting much greater benefits, especially in areas of personal clarity. I used to think heart virtues were very complex and hard to identify, but they are beautifully simple. In fact, I used to think that we have different heart virtues for different periods of our lives, but I was surprised and somewhat delighted to find that each person has only one heart virtue throughout life. Once we know what it is, we know what and who we are. We don't have to be saints to discover our life's purpose. A young woman named Amy working at a department store wanted to know hers. I worked with her and we discovered that she had a deep-seated commitment to teamwork. After a short time and a few small acts of courage, she received a promotion in her company that allowed her to create a dynamic team there. This wasn't her goal, it was her intention. All she did was openly acknowledge an internal commitment. Every choice that we make to discover and follow our soul's mandate takes courage, an act of the heart. Whether or not it is worth the risk is up to you. For me, that choice was to become a monk. What I discovered is that our heart virtue is our most intimate, sensitive, delicate part of us. Yet it is also our most indestructible and immortal part. It is what gives a martyr the courage to face death and a hero the clarity to risk it. When we know our heart virtue, we have absolute clarity and confidence about who we are and why we are on this earth. Knowing our heart virtue shifts us from desperation for results to appreciation for experiences. Suddenly, there aren't enough minutes, and there's plenty of time in the day to accomplish the things we feel most passionately about. Bending time. A few years ago, I was sitting at lunch with 3 successful entrepreneurs, 2 of whom were complaining about not having enough free time. The third leaned over to me and whispered, "I thought all time was free." His Buddha-like smile revealed the wise depth of his quizzical statement. Think about it. All time is free. We don't pay for it. We have 24 free hours every day. Free until we assign them to something, and even then, they're still free. When we're doing what we love, we lose track of time. We can actually bend or stretch time, too. Perhaps you've had this experience. You have an appointment 30 minutes away, but you leave late, so you only have 20 minutes to get there. You hit traffic, but you're not discouraged because you put all your intention on getting there as early as you can, and you end up arriving 5 minutes early. You bent time. Have you ever had a dream that was a day long and awakened to find that you'd only been asleep for 15 minutes? There seems to be no limit to how much experience we can fit into a fixed period of time. In a monastery, time seems to stand still, especially once we dedicate our lives fully to this path. After about 5 years, it was clear to me, in my heart, this would be my chosen path for life. Time didn't much matter after that. Neither did position. After 8 years in the monastery, I was sent out into the world. By then, in and out didn't matter much. I was ready to make a specific contribution, and it didn't matter where I was. Our heart virtue. Mother Teresa's heart virtue is compassion. Martin Luther King's heart virtue is brotherhood. Abraham Lincoln's heart virtue is unity. Mahatma Gandhi's heart virtue is peaceful liberation. Amy's heart virtue is teamwork. And my heart virtue is spiritual integrity, which means that seeing people live in alignment with their spiritual purpose gives me goosebumps. That is why I wrote this book, so people could experience spiritual integrity through knowing their heart virtue. My goal is to awaken as many people as possible to their heart virtue before I leave this earth. Living in alignment with our heart virtue is, I believe, the way of happiness. As I share with you what I have learned and what has been tested and proven in the lives of hundreds who have learned their heart virtue, I will also share myself with you, my life's deepest frustrations and moments of truth. I am like you, a person who asked, is there more? Is this all there is to life? Like you, I have my own daily quota of small acts of courage. Like you, I have tried to change or fix other people with no success. It is only through clarity, by learning who I am at my core and what I most want for the world, that I have been revived into living a meaningful, valuable life. This means knowing who I am, communicating it beautifully, and making a meaningful contribution. Then the rewards show up. That ache for fulfillment that I used to have is now a feeling of richness, yearning to give back out of a thrilling sense of gratitude for what I have seen heart virtues do for people. Are we 6 billion people living in one world, or one people living in 6 billion worlds? Is there one virtuous truth that has evaded all but a handful of individuals? Or are there 6 billion pieces, individual virtues, evading the truth of their oneness? Are you after the truth or your truth? I hope you find both in this book. As you read and experiment with these principles, you are stepping across the threshold from mere existence into the beautiful intention behind your life. I am committed to seeing that you have clarity and confidence about who you are and why you are here, and that you experience your ability to make a meaningful contribution. Perhaps you've already tried to guess what your heart virtue is. Many of my clients have begun their first session stating, I already know what my heart virtue is. I wish it could be that simple, but it's not. I've tried to lead people through the process of identifying their heart virtue through printed material, workbooks, website assessments, but much to my frustration, it doesn't work. The process of identifying one's heart virtue requires live interaction with another person, a trained facilitator, for reasons that will be explained in this book. I will nonetheless do my best to take you as far along this path as I can with written words. As you move through this book, you can refer to the flow chart below, which maps out the process of moving toward discovering your heart virtue. Here is an outline of the steps we will cover. 1. Understanding what a heart virtue is. 2. Understanding why our heart virtue makes us yearn to change things for the better. 3. Admitting that trying to change others and/or ourselves doesn't work for anyone. The harder we try, the less people change. 4. Realizing that fulfillment is an inside-out deal, an experience of contribution, not an outside-in program, pill, or plug-in, and that when inner wealth does not precede outer wealth, the results are disastrous. 5. Facing that the reason we don't realize any of this yet is because our tribal agreements and our blind spots. 6. Seeing that we have a brain in our heart, which we can use to discover our heart virtue and create our vision and a new life. 7. Taking an inventory of our goosebumps and rage experiences to find out what is most meaningful to us and reveal our heart virtue. And 8. Letting heart virtue use us to make a meaningful contribution and build fulfilling relationships and a rewarding career. Carl Sagan said, "If you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you have to start with the universe." Chapter 1. Our Heart Virtue. Most people want to change their behaviors, or more commonly, the behaviors of others, without first understanding the source of our behaviors. What is behind these behaviors? Our behaviors come from our beliefs. How we believe is how we will behave. And where do our beliefs come from? Our beliefs are born out of our values, whatever is most meaningful to us. Whatever we most value creates our beliefs, which determines our behaviors. But what is the source of our values? Where did we get our values? The most common answer people give when I ask this question is, our values come from our families. Well, have you ever seen two people from the exact same family that had totally different values? Of course. In fact, have you ever seen two people from the same family with the same values? I haven't. One child values freedom and aliveness, and another values peace and harmony, or togetherness and friendship. Even twins rarely have the same values. In the first few months of life, we see a person's heart virtue beginning to mold their personality and their temperament. We think our lives are motivated from the outside in. What this book is really about is shifting our outside-in perspective to living life from the inside out. This means realizing that our thoughts and actions are motivated from the inside by our values and our innermost core value, our heart virtue. Think about the implication that each one of us, although we may have been taught much from the outside in, has something more powerful inside us, creating who we are from the inside out. Embracing this inside-out paradigm creates a new experience of learning, thinking, and living that is so profound it will redefine your relationship with yourself, your religion, and your world. There is something unique to each person that creates their particular set of values, beliefs, and behaviors from the inside out. That something unique is their heart virtue. In other words, a person's heart virtue creates their core values, defining their beliefs and causing their behaviors. A person's heart virtue is the single core value they are willing to die for. Since we now know that we can't change others, we might as well go into inquiry mode, get curious, and seek to discover what really drives that person. What is their heart virtue? Or what is at the heart of their human being? Every human being has a single heart virtue that is built into the molecules like spiritual DNA. The heart virtue does not change throughout our life. It is indestructible, immortal, invincible, and non-negotiable from the day we are born to the day we die. I used to think it did change, that we have one virtue for childhood, a different one for adolescence, and others as we mature. But the data, several thousand clients worth, shows that it does not. Our heart virtue is determining our values, defining our beliefs, and dictating our behaviors. The key to replacing old behaviors with new behaviors is to know our heart virtue. Then, our behaviors will change from the inside out, instead of fruitless attempts at behavior modification. We easily adopt new beliefs when we see that they put us in alignment with what we really want, our strongest innermost desires. Heart virtues all around us. Heart virtues are not only built into us, they are built into everything meaningful in our lives. All religions, countries, schools, and companies admire and live by codes of virtue. Doesn't every religion have the same core virtues in common? Truth, loyalty, honesty, respect, kindness, etc. Corporate mission statements are packed with these virtues. They frequently contain words like honest, sincere, teamwork, leadership, empowerment, reliable, responsible. Countries go to war over these virtues. In America, we are willing to die for freedom. That is America's heart virtue. But in Japan, freedom is not as important as one's lineage. Japan's heart virtue is about honoring our ancestors. That is what kamikaze pilots were willing to die for. And if you've ever been to a Japanese Shinto temple, you would see thousands of statues honoring ancestors. In China, neither freedom nor honoring ancestors rule the culture. China's heart virtue is community. When I was in China, they assigned a tour guide to me. This 24-year-old valedictorian traveled all over the country with me to keep an eye on me. My passion for curiosity had me asking her all sorts of questions, some personal. When I asked her if she had her own apartment, she said, "Oh no, I live with my parents." I asked her, "What about when you get married?" She replied, "I will either move in with my husband's family or we'll get a large apartment and my parents will move in." Unimaginable to me. I left home when I was 15 and lived pretty much on my own until 1999 when I married my wonderful wife. That's the difference between a culture of freedom and a culture of community. And it explains why America and China have a history of misunderstanding each other. Countries will go to war over these non-negotiable principles. Heart virtues also have roots in Eastern philosophy and literature. The voluminous Mahabharata, scriptures of India, is thousands of years old. It contains hundreds of stories about warrior kings, like Yudhishthira, who is an incarnation of truth. He is so elevated by his deep commitment to truth that he walks with his feet 1 inch off the ground. One day, Yudhishthira finds himself on the battlefield, hopelessly outnumbered, so he twists the truth and tricks the opposing general, Drona, into thinking his son is dead by killing an elephant of the same name, Abhimanyu. Then he tells Drona that Abhimanyu is dead. Drona erroneously assumes he is talking about his son, and this throws him into such despair that he is able to be defeated. Because of his betrayal to his heart virtue, truth, Yudhishthira settles to the ground, and from that day forward must walk with his feet on the ground. Indian children are told this story to emphasize the importance of virtues. Virtues are also symbolically represented through the animal kingdom. For instance, the lion is leadership. The owl is wisdom. The dog is loyalty. The cat is independence. The horse is liberation. The bird is freedom. And the villainous anti-virtues are also represented. The snake is sneaky, slippery, evasive. The fox is sly. The shark is cold-blooded, vicious. The wolf an opportunist. Vultures are scavengers. Our names and the names we give to our children also translate directly into virtues. Hannah means grace. Irene means harmony. Catherine means purity. Mary means faith. Edward means leadership. Jeffrey means peace. Jonathan means generosity. Virtues are at the core of our entertainment as well. Every movie, every book, every sitcom, and every sporting event is about a journey of a human being towards self-actualizing their heart virtue. This is the hero's journey, and it is your journey if you choose it. Any movie or sitcom that does not contain the hero's journey will flop. People love to watch different versions of the hero's journey because it is the most meaningful experience any human being can have. We all yearn to know our hero's path and passionately cooperate with our heart virtue's desire to make a contribution through us. In this sense, you do not have a heart virtue, it has you. It is living your life from the inside out. You either embrace it and enjoy the process or resist it and suffer. Either way, it will have its way with you. Your heart virtue is set in stone. Before it dies, you will die. Many heroes throughout history have died for their heart virtue. Once you realize what drives you the most, your burning desire is revealed. Then you can go out and begin contributing to the world. As you read this, realize that there is nothing stopping you from becoming another Mother Teresa, Gandhi, or Martin Luther King. There is nothing these people did that you cannot do. They had no superhuman powers. They simply lived in alignment with their heart virtue, committed to making a contribution. That is the power of your heart virtue. If the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. Abraham Maslow. Chapter 2. From Outside In to Inside Out. Your husband is a good man, but for the 20 years that you've been married, he leaves his stuff lying around. You got him to pick up his socks, but then his wet towel ends up on the bed. You get him to pick up the towel, then his toothbrush shows up on the sink. You have kindly requested, sternly insisted, and passionately argued with him, and even visited a marriage counselor. You've done your best to change him from a person who is unwilling to do something new and awkward just to please you, to someone who will do anything to make you happy. So, let me ask you, how's that working for you? Has he changed yet? The human psyche, I discovered, is much like a sea anemone. If you poke a sea anemone, it closes up. And then if you try to force it open, it really tightens up. If you walk away, you don't get to see it open, but if you stay and watch with curiosity, it blossoms right before your eyes, and you get to experience its hidden and delicate beauty. People are much the same way. We've all tried to change somebody else, and we've all been unsuccessful. You cannot change others, and the harder you try, the less likely they are to change. In fact, they will probably become more resistant. The fascinating thing is that even though we know we cannot change others, we still keep trying throughout our lives. Someone once told me that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Still, I have yet to meet anyone who can honestly say they have no desire to change others. One of my favorite questions to ask a client who is having trouble with his mate is, what would you do if you knew your mate wasn't going to change for the rest of their life? Bring to mind someone you want to change. Ask yourself, what if that person were to stay the same forever? What would you do? Whatever your answer is to that question, go ahead and do it, because moving forward in a relationship with expectations that others will change is irresponsible and aggravating. If you're like most people, your attitude becomes, well, if I can't change them, I'll change myself, because I certainly can't live with things the way they are. Here come the self-help books, the self-improvement programs, and workshops. In fact, the harder you try to change yourself, the more resentful you will become, because your psyche responds just like everyone else's. This is not to imply that you're not changing for the better. We all feel that we've changed. But is it really change? Or is the experience of change really unchanging to be authentic? Isn't evolving a better word to describe this process? When we've changed, isn't it closer to the truth that we have discovered something more meaningful to us and then shifted so that we live more in alignment with who we truly are? Everyone is evolving, and some people evolve so dramatically, so quickly, that they seem to actually have transformed overnight. But what we perceive as change is actually a process of becoming who we really are, evolving, not changing into who we are. Be responsible for awakening yourself to what is meaningful to you and stop trying to fix yourself. This evolution does not happen because of psychological or physical modifications, but rather because of an enlightenment, a new awareness of an innate truth that leads to self-actualization. It's a paradox, but true change comes from insight. How does this happen? When we evolve, what is it that occurs inside us? Is it like a sudden understanding, a kind of light bulb going on within us? We perceive that we've evolved when we discover something inside us, a reliable truth. We get clarity about ourselves and how we are being in the world. These are meaningful moments in our lives, and they make us deeper, richer people. It happens from the inside out. Personal evolution, therefore, happens less by trying to make it happen. The harder we try, the more resistant things become. Intention without trying, volition without force is what works. Personal evolution occurs naturally with self-understanding. When I finally learned this lesson deeply enough to live like it was true, I discovered a powerful law. When you completely give up trying to change people and get interested in them, and then believe in them, they will transform in ways that far exceed your wishes, not because they modified themselves, but because they discovered a deeper truth about themselves. Curiosity and courage. After leaving the monastery, I spent several summers working with 2-year-olds with learning disabilities. When I taught them, I didn't stand in front of the room and compel them to listen to me talk about how to tell the difference between colors and shapes. Why didn't I teach this way? I didn't teach this way because young children learn best through experience and playing, not by being lectured. In fact, I believe the only way human beings learn is through experiencing. It is interesting to note that the word education comes from the Latin root word educo, which means to draw forth or bring out. If your education was anything like mine, it was more packing in than drawing out. When I sat down with a child, gave him or her some blocks in different shapes and colors, I would ask them questions about the castle they were building instead of telling them or showing them how to build a castle. As they taught me about what they were doing, gradually they began to absorb the understanding of the difference between blue circles and blue squares and red triangles and yellow triangles. We all are like young children in this same way. We want to be heard and to be cared for. When that happens, something blooms within us, and we discover the world within and the world without. During this period, a friend asked me, "What are you learning from working with these 2-year-olds?" I told him a story about an Oriental boy playing with some blocks on the carpet. As I approached him from behind, he would turn and look up into my eyes. There was just one question on his face: "Do you love me right now?" If I smiled reassuringly, he would go on playing more happily than before. But if I frowned or looked concerned, he was distressed. I believe everyone we meet wants to know just one thing: do you love me right now? How does it feel when someone tells you what to do? Your psyche shrinks. And how does it feel when someone is deeply interested in you without an ulterior motive? Notice how good it feels just to be asked this question. While teaching works to prepare children to survive, merely surviving is not enough for most people. If we want them to thrive, we can draw out their brilliance by being more interested in them. Here's an experiment. For the next week, approach everyone you meet with these 4 words, revolving silently in your head. I believe in you. Watch what happens. You will become interested, and they will become interesting. George Washington Carver is famous for his advancements in botany, including finding hundreds of practical uses for the peanut. When asked how he discovered so much potential in a peanut, he replied, "Anything will give up its secrets if you love it enough." Albert Einstein said, "I have no special talents. I am only passionately curious." Passionate curiosity is so seductive that even nature cannot resist its magnetism. Prove it to yourself. Instead of telling your loved one what to do, ask them what they would love to do. On first meeting someone, instead of asking, "So what do you do?" ask, "So what do you love to do?" and turn up the curiosity in your voice. Start to tolerate the power of a more meaningful conversation. I have a very simple formula for human happiness, which has 2 ingredients: curiosity and courage. Here is the test. Recall a period of your life when you were supremely happy. Rewind a week or so from that moment, and I'll bet it was a period of your life when you were being curious and courageous. This is an example of an inside-out process. I also have a very simple formula for human misery, which also has 2 ingredients: conclusions and expectations. Here's the test. Recall a period of your life when you were awfully miserable. Rewind a week or so from that moment, and I'll bet it was a period of your life when you were filled with conclusions and expectations. This is an example of an outside-in process. This is one of the reasons children are so happy. They don't have expectations, they have anticipation. But as we grow up, we think it is so important to know, and our anticipation turns into expectation. Personally, I don't care as much for a know-it-all as I do for someone who is passionately curious. People don't care how much we know until they know how much we care. Passionate curiosity invites creativity. Since people don't like to be judged or told, the more curious we are, the more creative they become. Let's talk for a moment about creativity. If I gave you a blueprint, some lumber and nails, and you built a house, would you be doing something creative? No, you would be doing something constructive. Creativity is what happened when the house went on the blueprint. Human beings are the only creatures that can create. Beavers build dams and birds build nests, but they don't create them, design them, or improve them. They just construct them. For decades, scientists have tried to prove apes could learn to create. They've all failed because apes will only repeat what they are taught. Realizing this gave me an insight into working with people. If you train them like animals, they'll act more like animals. But if you elicit their innate creativity, they become more brilliant and behave like no other species, creating beautiful and amazing things. Bringing out the best in others begins by being sincerely interested and learning to really listen with curiosity and courage. Listening is my favorite subject. During the years that I was a monk, we ate every meal in silence. There was silence from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., and complete silence on a monthly 3-day and biannual 9-day retreats. Monks don't take vacations. On these 9-day retreats, at around the 5th day, I would begin to hear things I ordinarily would not. The wind through the trees, my own breathing, the subtle symphony of nature. As the muscle of listening became strong, I came to see how valuable listening is in every spiritual and meditative practice. Listening works from the inside out. I love the story of the queen who invited 2 dukes to a party to introduce them to her eligible daughter, the princess. While mingling before dinner, the princess had the opportunity to speak with each duke for half an hour or so. At dinner, the queen leaned over to the princess and inquired, "Do tell me of your conversations with the 2 dukes." The princess replied, "After meeting the first duke, I felt like I was talking to one of the most important people in the world. After meeting the second duke, I felt like I was one of the most important people in the world. The first duke used an outside-in approach, and the second duke used an inside-out approach." A woman came to me struggling in her marriage. Together we discovered her heart virtue, which gave her the confidence to take responsibility for herself. Though she had a fear of abandonment, she mustered up enough courage to get a separation. She didn't want a divorce, just some space and a little time to herself to introspect. Her husband did not respect her need for space, however. He began emailing her, sending her messages every day, putting pressure on her with his intensity. Through training herself to talk authentically about what was most meaningful to her, and this is the second step to becoming heroic, authentic, she became very assertive and clear in her communication. In our next coaching session, she decided to tell her husband, "If you don't make your next email fun for me, I'm going to stop reading them and just read them at the end of the month." In regards to his phone calls, she told him, "If you don't make your next call fun for me, I'm going to hang up." Let me ask you, was she trying to change him? No. She was saying, "Here's what I'm going to do in each situation." Her actions illustrate the importance of having clarity and confidence about who we are and where we stand. She said, "Here's what I'm committed to, and this is what I'm going to do. This is the way I'm wired, and if you can't live with that, then I want you to know that you're going to be around an intolerant person." Was she trying to change her husband? No. She was communicating beautifully exactly where she stood. Warning: married couples may think that this gives them license to be heavy-handed or evasive. It's great to acknowledge one's boundaries, but part of communicating beautifully means committing to reconnect. For example, if you tell your spouse, "I'm taking a time out and I'm not going to discuss this anymore," then always give your spouse a time when you will discuss it. "I'll be back in touch with you in 15 minutes. Don't just hang up or walk out. Telling them when you'll return is communicating beautifully instead of just communicating. When we're done with our break, it's our job to go find the other person and continue the conversation with respect. Listening and heart virtues are actually intimately related. In fact, the heart virtue assessment process was originally invented to solve a difficult problem I was having in my work with improving a couple's ability to listen to each other. I noticed that there was a cathartic shift in the relationship once the partners experienced the deeper levels of listening. But I would frequently hit a wall, usually with the more masculine partner. What would happen is that just about the time when one partner was about to really hear the other, that listener would hit a psychological wall and have to stop. This was very frustrating to the speaker, and myself too. The listener would either look up and away or just go blank and shut down emotionally. You see, when we really listen to someone empathetically, we step into their world for a time. If we are confident in ourselves, the experience is delightful. But if we have low self-esteem or inner insecurity, this experience can be very personally threatening. Listening often means leaving our reality for a few minutes to enter the reality of another person. So I knew that if I was going to provide people with that lovingly intimate and beautiful connecting experience of listening, it would be imperative to have a tool for creating self-confidence quickly. Without that confidence, people struggle to really listen. There was another factor working against me. Did you know that the connective tissue between the two hemispheres of the human brain, the corpus callosum, is on average 1/3 smaller in men than in women? What this means is that men are, in general, less connected with themselves. In a spicy conversation, we men become overwhelmed by our feelings and emotions well before our female partners. That's why we are usually the first to bail out of an intimate conversation. We retreat or explode because we are psychologically and physiologically impaired when it comes to processing emotions with women. This is probably why men rarely talk in public restrooms while women do so more frequently. It became clear to me that if people were going to really experience the beauty of listening to each other, it would really be handy to have some bulletproof self-confidence. Heart Virtues was the answer, a simple, quick process that gives a person clarity and confidence in less than an hour. From then on, I made it a prerequisite to identify a client's heart virtue before working with them on their career or primary relationships, both of which greatly benefit from good listening skills. A funny thing happened. Whenever I was introducing my services to people, I would tell them about the clarity and confidence they would have by using the listening tips, tools, and techniques I would teach them. All the areas of your life will improve, I would say, when you're a better listener. And then I would throw in, oh, and by the way, as a part of the process, you'll get your heart virtue. What happened was that the heart virtue assessment process grew to be more popular than the listening techniques, which were pretty damn good. I love listening. It provides a beautiful context for all aspects of my work. Listening with passionate curiosity to whatever is most meaningful is the way to identify a person's heart virtue. And, ironically, once we know our heart virtue, we can listen better because we have more confidence and are less threatened by what other people say. Listening is deeper if we lose our agenda. If we have an agenda, we're not listening. When someone wants something from us, if we just look at them, how many seconds does it take to realize that they have an agenda? We can see it in an instant. Listening is powerful, but if we use listening to get people to do what we want, we're not listening. If you're not convinced that it is better to throw out your agenda, try an experiment. Surrender your agenda for 1 week. Tell yourself, I'm going to accept that I'm not going to understand this at all for 1 week. But for 1 week, I am not going to have any agenda. Completely surrender your agenda, not partially, and not to manipulate. Don't try it, just do it. Like Yoda said to Luke Skywalker, there is no try. There is do and do not. Observe how the human psyche works. Let me ask you a question. Has it been your experience that when you really try hard to get something and force it, that you get it? Have you noticed the way people react when you use force? The more you try, the less they change. If you don't believe that's true, and you're still thinking, what if I don't get what I want? Then you're not listening. You are still stuck in knowing, the opposite of listening. When Albert Einstein remarked, I have no special talents, I am only passionately curious, he was disclosing the tool he used to get the universe to share its secrets with him. More brilliant than a high IQ, if you ask me. He created much with that passionate curiosity. It's wonderful to let go of trying to change or fix other people. What a relief. Even better, there is a way to be present with others that allows them to find their own answers and to evolve. Actually, the urge to fix other people doesn't ever go away permanently, but when the urge comes, exercising the muscle of listening works. This is because if we discover something new about someone, it changes our perception of them. So to us, they've changed. When we have an agenda, most of us will use this outside-in approach, and it doesn't work very well. 1, know the result of what we want. 2, use force to get it. 3, manipulate or make promises if force doesn't work. 4, once we have it, minimize the promises. Here's another approach, and it creates a more fulfilling experience from the inside out. 1, know what experience we want. 2, admit we have an agenda. Result. 3, give up our agenda and focus on the experience. 4, listen for what will create that experience. 5, state our intentions and/or make a request. And 6, receive a response. 7, state our choices. Here's a more detailed description of the process. Step 1, get absolute clarity about what experiences we are committed to creating. Before beginning an important conversation, ask yourself this: what is really wanting to happen in this conversation? Get clarity about the answer to that question in private before we begin a dialogue. For example, I used to be very withholding with my mother. One day, she sincerely requested a deeper conversation with me about my childhood. The ensuing conversation lasted 4 days. During that conversation, I was always clear that my purpose was to communicate to her my feelings and my experience of growing up with her as my mother. My purpose was not to punish her with shame or guilt or anger. It was to peacefully and clearly explain my feelings and my experience in a way that created an experience of mutual understanding. During the 4 days that we spoke to one another, there were many tense moments. I would lapse into anger and have to stop, remember my purpose, and return to it. She would burst into tears and take a break, but neither of us gave up. We were not distracted from our purpose, and now we understand each other on a deeper level than before. Step 2, lose our agenda. Silently acknowledge our desire to fix them. This includes wanting to help, assist, support, or serve. Even if we are good at fixing other people, they will learn how to be broken all the time. This will become the essence of our relationships with others, and we may find that the only relationships we have are dependent or codependent. What we really want is to make a contribution and to creatively evolve through our experiences with others. We'll talk about how to do this later. Step 3, give up all desire to change others, knowing we cannot. We can transform all desires to change others with a passionate curiosity about their life. Eventually, we develop the new habit of stopping our impulse in its tracks. This takes time and vigilance. Old habits die hard, but the new insights are well worth the sacrifice. Step 4, listen to awaken to the other person's intentions. Be curious and interested. This step allows us to show sincere interest in other people. We have no agenda about what they should or should not say or do. We are simply empty, waiting and listening. Our interest in them is pure and real. They feel our openness and willingness to really hear and to really understand. Exercise curiosity at this point. Ask questions like, what do you really want? What are you most concerned about? Or what experience do you want to have with me? Step 5, communicate our stand and/or our intentions briefly and without rancor. I don't believe we set boundaries. Instead, we simply acknowledge them. When our boundaries are crossed, if we get clarity about what is meaningful and communicate it beautifully, the reaction we get won't matter. We did our 50% of 100%. Instead of, you'll never do that to me again, which is trying to set boundaries, try this. When you blank blank, I will blank blank. And then next time, simply follow through. Step 6, receive their response. Listen again to see if there is a request to elaborate or listen. Instead of assuming that the conversation is over once a conclusion is reached, stay curious and courageous. Keep asking, clarifying questions until the end of the conversation. Postpone conclusions and expectations. When we stay in the mode of discovery and curiosity, miraculous things can happen. Step 7, make our choice, mindful of our heart virtue, and communicate it crisply and beautifully. It is not necessary to identify what's right or wrong or good or bad or even the best option. We can just choose, make our choice, and even if it does not turn out to be the best choice, we did a great job acknowledging our desires and boundaries and communicating them clearly. For example, in the case of the woman whose husband was bothering her, she would regularly complain that anything said was used against her. Her husband would ask sympathetically about her concerns, and when she shared them, within a week they were used against her in an argument. Can you relate? So whenever questioned, I suggested that she respond with these 3 powerful words and nothing else. It's my choice. These words are so accurate it's hard to argue effectively against them, and it is very hard to use them against us later. Quite a few pages have been dedicated to the subject of listening, because it is the way to shift from outside in to inside out. Here are a few ideas about listening that may be helpful. Listening is like a muscle in your body. The way to be a better listener is to exercise it. When people stop listening, stop talking. Listen and observe the people who listen and observe. Listening heals psychosclerosis, a hardening of the attitudes. Listening is the opposite of knowing. Here's an adage: he who knows tells not, and he who tells knows not. Meditation is to listening as prayer is to talking. Listening teaches others from the inside out. Whenever we want to know if we're being a good listener, ask out loud, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you feel heard by me? True stories. Stop trying to change and listen. Have you ever tried to change a teenager? I have 2 brothers 10 years younger than myself. They discovered 4-letter words when they were 10 and I was 20. I got a full dose when I went to visit them during the first winter break. I was appalled, and my parents were permissive. My gut reaction was to tell them to clean up their act. The more I said this, the worse their behavior became. Eventually, I gave up my outside-in approach and approached them from the inside out. When they used a 4-letter word, I began asking, "What does that mean?" They would say something like, "He's an asshole," or "He's a douchebag." I then asked them what the difference was. Were they the same thing? Finally, the 3 of us sat down and created a 4-letter word dictionary. We defined all the vulgar terms. For instance, the word fuck means something unexpected just happened. The word asshole describes someone who does something to hurt other people. A shithead is someone that does something without thinking. The word douchebag describes someone who has low moral character, and so forth. Whenever one of my brothers used a vulgar expletive, I clarified the meaning of each vulgar word. When one brother said, "Frankie is an asshole," I would ask, "Did Frankie do something intentionally to hurt someone?" No, he would say, "Frankie just made a stupid mistake." And gradually, as we began to communicate more accurately, using actual descriptions, my brothers felt better and expressed themselves better. Instead of me preaching, by embracing where they were and courageously exploring with them, we all expressed ourselves more authentically. And here is a very important point. I was not authoritative or telling them, but I turned the statement I wanted to make into a question. I call that a quanswer, asking a question instead of giving an answer. I know what my truth is, and quanswers reveal theirs to me. Contradictionary definitions. This experience with my little brothers led to an enlightening project with an old friend, a contradictionary, a publication with poetic definitions for the heart instead of the head. Here are a few. Attack, seeking peace through war. Confusion, believing beliefs that have produced the unbelievable. Courage, moving at the speed of fear. Heretic, the literal Greek translation is one who is able to choose. Interpretation versus experience, trying to eat the menu instead of the meal. Listening, how I express myself through you. Sincerity, being the change one wants to see in the world. Unconditional, when your fear doesn't affect my love. Wisdom, The worship of what is. What isdom? Worry, fearing the false fantasy future. One last definition, and this one is right out of the dictionary. The nocebo effect. You probably have heard of the placebo effect, the beneficial effect in a patient following a particular treatment that arises from the patient's expectations concerning the treatment rather than the treatment itself. For example, giving patients sugar pills and telling them that the pills can cure them of some disease has time and again shown to actually augment many patients' healing. The nocebo effect is the opposite of the placebo effect and even more dramatic because it's deadly. Nocebo kicks in when a doctor tells a patient that they have cancer and that the patient only has a 10% chance of living. Research has shown that the nocebo effect can reverse the body's response to true medical treatment from positive to negative. A nocebo, from Latin I will harm, is something that should be ineffective to the body but which causes symptoms of ill health. A nocebo effect is an ill effect caused by the suggestion or belief that something is harmful. The term nocebo is relatively new. In the past, the placebo effect was given credit for negative as well as positive influences. Because nocebos are proven to cause harm, few studies have been done compared to placebos. However, the following data supports this theory. More than 2/3 of 34 college students developed headaches when told that a non-existent electrical current passing through their heads could produce a headache. Japanese researchers tested 57 high school boys for their sensitivity to skin allergens. Boys who reported having severe reactions to poisonous plants were blindfolded. Researchers brushed one arm with leaves from a lacquer tree, which causes skin irritation, but told the boys they were chestnut tree leaves, which were non-poisonous. The scientists stroked the other arm with chestnut leaves, but said the foliage came from a lacquer tree. Within minutes, the arm the boys believed to have been exposed to the poisonous tree began to react, turning red and developing a bumpy, itchy rash. In most cases, the arm that had contact with the actual poison did not react. In the Framingham Heart Study, women who believe they are prone to heart disease were nearly 4 times as likely to die as women with similar risk factors who didn't believe. In Australia, witch doctors using killing sticks. When someone wants to kill someone else, they go to the local witch doctor and get a killing stick. When the killing stick is pointed at someone, within 2 days they get sick, dehydrated, and die, just by having the stick pointed at them. This technique is so effective, the Australian government passed a law that pointing a killing stick qualifies as murder with a deadly weapon. In one experiment, asthmatic patients breathed in a vapor that researchers told them was a chemical irritant or allergen. Nearly half of the patients experienced breathing problems, with a dozen developing full-blown attacks. They were treated with a substance they believed to be an antidote and recovered immediately. In actuality, both the irritant and the antidote were simple saltwater solution. What have you been believing in lately that may be dramatically affecting your health and well-being? In the early 20th century, Napoleon Hill interviewed 500 of the world's most successful people and wrote a book about what he learned from them called Think and Grow Rich. Napoleon Hill's simple conclusion was, you become what you think about. Millionaires were perpetually thinking about making money, and tycoons were perpetually thinking about business. So, be careful. Thoughts are things. Quantum physics explains placebo and nocebo effects. In my studies of quantum physics, it was the quarks that best explained my experience of the placebo and nocebo effects. Quarks are tiny subatomic particles, more like energy clusters, that seem to show up when and where an observer looks for them. Therefore, it appears that the observer is actually creating them just by curiously looking for them. Wayne Dyer, who has been promoting the power of intention, says, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. It would appear that there is plenty of proof of the law of attraction, that we pretty much get what we look for. Or is that just What is showing up here because I am looking for it to be that way? Corporations have made good use of the placebo-nocebo effect. A pharmaceutical company puts together an objective study to see if one of its products is harmless and finds that it is. Then some consumer advocate puts together a study to see if the same product is deadly, and that's exactly what the results of their objective study confirms. In the movie What the Bleep Do We Know?, it is clearly and scientifically pointed out that we are not really perceiving our emotions, we're manufacturing them. Our hypothalamus manufactures peptides for happiness, sorrow, passion, rage, etc., and then sends these little messengers out to the organs and cells of the body, creating the response we call our feelings, which we so often believe are caused by other people. It seems more likely that we intend to blame someone first and then manufacture some victim peptides so we have a reason, feelings, to blame them. So what are we getting in life that is what we are most looking for in life? Or more accurately, we don't get what we pray for, we get where we pray from. But keep in mind that prayers may be answered directly with experiences, not necessarily with results that give experiences. If someone prays, "I'm broke, Lord, please help me, I need some money," they are praying from a perspective of poverty, and their prayers are answered. They receive poverty in the moment. Yet when someone prays, "Lord, I thank you for all the riches I have and the ability to create at will whatever I most desire," they are praying from prosperity. And I believe that no prayer goes unanswered. Perhaps all this explains why the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The real fun starts when we stop looking for things to be any particular way and exercise passionate curiosity. If listening really does work better, perhaps we have the greatest impact when we become the silent observer.